I didn't know my family would fracture because of 3 fake $20 bills. If you had asked me a year ago what the safest place in my life was, I would have said my home. A quiet 3-bedroom house I bought on my own when I was 31. No chaos, no drama, just routines, Sunday dinners, and the comforting illusion that the people I loved most would never lie to my face. I was wrong. I'm 36 years old. I live alone. I don't have a husband or kids, but I do have a family, or at least I thought I did. A younger brother I trusted with my grief, a sister-in-law who smiled at me across the dinner table, and a nephew I treated like my own child. The kind of nephew you build gaming PCs with, the kind who texts you dumb memes at midnight, the kind who says thank you when you buy him burgers and helps carry groceries without being asked. That's what made it unbearable. The first time I noticed the money missing, I told myself it was nothing. I always carried cash, $40 every Monday, same routine, same ATM, parking meters, food trucks, small stuff. But by the third week, the numbers didn't add up. Receipts said one thing, my wallet said another. And the truth whispered something I didn't want to hear. When I finally confronted him, alone, gently, in a parked car, I wasn't angry. I wasn't yelling. I just wanted honesty. I even gave him an out, a chance to explain without involving his parents. He cried. Not quiet tears, real sobs, the kind that make you question your own sanity. He told his parents I accused him of stealing. They didn't ask questions. They didn't listen. They didn't believe me. Instead, they told me I was jealous, bitter, projecting because I was single and they had a family. That was the moment something in me broke, not loudly, not dramatically, but completely. So I did something I never imagined myself doing. Something that would follow a 17-year-old boy into a police station. Something that would put my brother on the phone, screaming my name like it was a curse. I set a trap. And once it snapped shut, there was no way to pretend this was ever just about missing cash again. This is the story of how a family built on trust collapsed, of how love and denial can protect the wrong person, and how doing what feels necessary can still destroy everything you were trying to save. Before any of this happened, my life was steady. Not perfect. Not the kind of life people post about like a highlight reel, but steady in a way that felt earned, like I had dragged myself through enough pain to finally deserve peace. I'm Emily, 36. I work a stable office job, the kind where your weeks are measured in meetings, inboxes, deadlines, and microwave lunches. I'm not rich, but I'm comfortable. 5 years ago, I bought a 3-bedroom house by myself, something I was quietly proud of, even if I didn't say it out loud very often. A lot of that pride came from the fact that I built my life after losing the people who first built me. 8 years ago, our parents died in a car accident. One phone call, one moment, and then everything that used to feel permanent became a memory that hurt to touch. After the funeral, the house felt wrong. Silence became heavy. Holidays became unbearable. And grief did what it always does. It made time move oddly, stretching one day into 10, and then suddenly skipping entire months. That was when my younger brother Sullivan became my anchor. Sullivan is 39 now, the kind of man who looks calm even when he's drowning. He doesn't talk about feelings much, but he shows love in practical ways, driving over without being asked, fixing a leaky faucet, bringing groceries, making sure you eat. Despite our age gap, we'd always been close, but after our parents died, we became tighter, like two survivors clinging to the same piece of wood in the middle of a storm. He would come over on Sundays with takeout, or he'd sit with me in my living room while I cried and didn't know how to stop. He didn't tell me to be strong. He didn't rush me. He just stayed. And when he married Charlotte, I welcomed her because I wanted Sullivan to have happiness. I wanted him to have something bright after we lost everything. Charlotte is sharp, organized, confident in a way that can feel like judgment if you're not careful. But in the beginning, she wasn't cruel to me. She was polite, warm enough, and she seemed to love my brother. They built a life quickly. House in the suburbs, family routines, weekend chores, holiday traditions. And then there was Jude, my nephew. Jude turned 17 recently. He was born when I was 19 and still in college, back when my own life was messy and uncertain, and Sullivan was figuring out fatherhood while still figuring out himself. I remember holding Jude when he was tiny, thinking how strange it was that someone so small could matter so much. As he got older, Jude became the centerpiece of Sullivan's world. Charlotte had a parenting philosophy she was proud of. She called it respectful parenting. The idea was that you never punish too harshly, never shame, never push too hard. Kids should learn from natural consequences. In theory, it sounded gentle. In practice, Jude rarely faced consequences at all. When he was 12, he broke a neighbor's window playing baseball in the street. Sullivan and Charlotte paid for it. Jude didn't lose privileges. He didn't do chores. He didn't earn the money back. The message was quiet, but clear. You make mistakes, and someone else fixes them. When he was 14, he got caught vaping at school. They sat him down for a long talk about health. Then they handed him his phone and computer back like nothing happened. Last year, he failed 2 classes because he stopped turning in homework. They hired a tutor. They didn't restrict gaming. They didn't push structure. They didn't make him prove he was studying. Again, someone else cleaned up the mess. And yet, despite all that, I still loved that boy. Because with me, Jude wasn't a monster. He wasn't a problem kid. He was quiet, a little withdrawn, polite enough. He always said thank you when I bought him food or a new game. He helped carry groceries without being asked. When he was excited, you could see it in the way his eyes brightened, like a light flickering on behind a wall. I was the aunt who felt safe to him. I was the one who built gaming PCs with him. We'd sit at my kitchen table, parts spread out like a puzzle, motherboard, RAM, GPU, cables coiled like snakes. Jude would lean in, serious, focused, hands steady as he learned cable routing, overclocking, benchmark testing. I taught him how to do it right, how not to rush, how patience mattered. Every other Saturday, I'd pick him up. Sometimes we grabbed burgers and went to the arcade. Other times, we sat in my living room and played whatever new game he was obsessed with. He'd talk about school in small pieces, never too much at once. He didn't open up easily, but he opened up more with me than anyone else. I thought that meant something. I thought the bond we had, the time, the trust, the rituals, made us solid. And Sullivan trusted me too. For years, we did Sunday dinners almost every week. We showed up for each other. I even helped them financially when they needed it, gave them money for a down payment on their house because I believed in family, taking care of family. So when things started going wrong, when the money started disappearing, the part that hurt most wasn't the cash. It was the fact that I never imagined I would have to prove the truth to my own family. Because I didn't start this story angry. I started it with love, with trust, with a wallet on my kitchen counter and a quiet fear I didn't want to name. The first time I noticed something was off, I brushed it aside. I've always kept a little cash in my wallet, not for emergencies, just convenience. Parking meters near my office. Food trucks on busy days when I didn't feel like sitting down for lunch. The kind of expenses you don't overthink because they're small and forgettable. Every Monday morning, same routine. I'd stop at the ATM in my office building lobby and withdraw exactly $40. 2 crisp 20s. I'd slide them into my wallet and move on with my week. I liked that routine. It felt controlled, predictable. So when I reached for my wallet one Thursday afternoon and found only $12 left, I didn't panic. I frowned. Sure. I replayed my week in my head. Coffee here, parking there. Maybe I'd paid for someone else's lunch without thinking about it. The following week, it happened again. $40 on Monday, $8 by Friday. This time, the unease settled deeper. I started paying attention in a way I hadn't before. I kept receipts. Every coffee, every sandwich, every parking stub folded neatly and tucked behind my credit cards. By the 3rd week, I sat at my kitchen table on a Sunday night, spreading them out like evidence. $18 spent. $5 left in my wallet. My stomach tightened. I didn't want to jump to conclusions. I'm not a paranoid person. I know how easy it is to accuse the wrong thing and ruin relationships over misunderstandings. So instead of confronting anyone, I did what made sense to me. I looked for another explanation. At work during lunch, I mentioned it casually to my coworker Dennis. I feel like I'm losing my mind, I said, poking at a sad desk salad. My cash keeps disappearing, but I can't figure out how. Dennis raised an eyebrow. Does anyone else have access to your house? The question landed heavier than it should have. I thought through it carefully. Sullivan and Charlotte came over occasionally. Jude came over regularly. Besides them, no one. I didn't have roommates. I didn't host parties. I didn't have cleaners or repair people stopping by unannounced. Dennis leaned back in his chair. If you want to know for sure, he said, you test it, quietly. That night, I stood at the ATM longer than usual. Instead of 40, I withdrew 80, 4 20s. I counted them twice under the harsh fluorescent lights, folded them carefully, and slid them into my wallet. When I got home, I placed my wallet on the kitchen counter and went into my bedroom to fold laundry. I kept glancing at the clock. 20 minutes later, I walked back into the kitchen and counted again. All 420s were still there. Relief washed through me, followed quickly by confusion. Maybe I really was misremembering. Maybe stress was doing strange things to my brain. 2 days later, Jude came over after school. We were supposed to install a new graphics card I'd ordered. A big upgrade, something he'd been excited about all week. I set my wallet on the coffee table in the living room and went into the garage to grab my toolkit. I was gone for maybe 5 minutes. When I came back, Jude was sitting on the couch, scrolling through his phone like always. We installed the card, ran benchmarks, talked about frame rates and cooling. He laughed at something on his screen. He seemed normal. After he left, I sat alone on my couch. My heart started pounding before I even opened my wallet. One $20 bill was gone. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just sat there, staring at the wall, replaying every interaction we'd ever had. This was the kid I bought Christmas presents for. The kid who sent me memes. The kid who asked me for advice. My chest felt tight, like I couldn't quite breathe. I knew what the evidence said, but I didn't want it to be true. And more than that, I didn't want this to turn into a family war. So I made a decision that felt fair at the time. I would talk to Jude privately. No parents, no accusations, no drama. Just honesty. I told myself that if I handled it gently enough, if I gave him space to tell the truth without fear, we could fix this quietly. I had no idea how wrong I was. The following Saturday, I picked Jude up like I always did. Same time, same spot, same small wave when he got into the passenger seat. If I hadn't been watching so closely, I might have missed the tension in his shoulders, the way his fingers kept tapping against his phone. Normally, we'd head straight to the arcade or grab burgers first. That day, I drove past our usual turn. Jude looked up. Where are we going? There's somewhere I want to talk, I said, keeping my voice steady. Just for a minute. I pulled into the empty parking lot behind the old community center on Maple Street. The building had been abandoned for years. Peeling paint, cracked pavement, weeds growing through the asphalt. I put the car in park and turned to face him. My heart was racing, but I kept my tone calm. Jude, I said, I need to ask you something. And I want you to know I'm not angry. He stared out the window, jaw tight. I've noticed money going missing from my wallet, I continued. I've checked. I've counted. I need to understand why. His head snapped toward me. What? He said sharply. I'm not accusing you to be cruel, I said quickly. I care about you. And if something's going on, if you're in trouble, we can figure it out together. We don't have to tell your parents if you're honest with me. For a split second, I thought I saw fear flash across his face. Then his expression crumpled. He started crying. Not the quiet kind. Not the embarrassed sniffles teenagers try to hide. He cried hard, shoulders shaking, face red, breath uneven. My stomach dropped. I can't believe you'd think that, he choked out. I thought you trusted me. I do, I said softly. That's why I'm talking to you like this. I never took anything from you, he said, wiping his eyes angrily. Never. And it really hurts that you'd even say that. The words hit me like a slap. I just need the truth, I said. He shook his head. Take me home. The rest of the drive was silent. When we pulled into his driveway, he didn't say goodbye. He opened the door, stepped out, and walked straight into the house without looking back. 10 minutes later, my phone rang. It was Charlotte. She didn't let me finish saying hello. What is wrong with you? She snapped. Jude came inside crying. I tried to explain about the counted money, the missing 20s. But she talked over me, her voice rising. You are clearly projecting something onto my son, she said. Maybe you're jealous that we have a family and you're still alone. The words burned. I would never accuse Jude without reason, I said, my hands shaking. He would never steal, she said flatly. You need help if you think otherwise. Then Sullivan got on the line. His voice wasn't angry, it was tired. Emily, he said, can we just let this go? Apologize to Jude, we'll move on. Apologize for telling the truth. I'm not apologizing, I said quietly. I didn't argue further, I didn't push, but I knew, deep in my bones, that something was wrong. And I knew no one was going to believe me without proof they couldn't talk their way around. That night, I sat alone in my living room, staring at my wallet on the table. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel vengeful. I felt cornered. And that's when I made the decision that would change everything. I decided I needed evidence. I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Jude's face in the car, red, wet with tears, twisted in something that looked like betrayal, or maybe panic. I kept replaying the conversation, dissecting every word, wondering if I'd pushed too hard, if I'd said something wrong, if there was still another explanation I was missing. By morning, my chest felt hollow. I went through the motions of my day on autopilot. Coffee I couldn't taste. Emails I barely remembered typing. Smiles I didn't mean. Underneath it all was one heavy, persistent thought. No one believes you. And worse, the people who should believe you the most think you're the problem. I tried to tell myself I should let it go. Stop inviting Jude over. Lock my wallet away. Protect myself quietly and move on. But that didn't sit right, because if I did that, I'd be admitting, silently, that I was the one who'd done something wrong. That I was willing to accept being called a liar just to keep the peace. I wasn't angry enough to explode. I wasn't calm enough to forgive. I was stuck in that awful middle space where you know the truth, but don't know how to carry it. 2 days later, during my lunch break, I sat in my car, scrolling through page after page of search results. I didn't even know exactly what I was looking for at first. I just knew I needed proof, something objective, something that didn't rely on anyone taking my word for it. That's when I found it. Prop money. Bills used for movies, music videos, photo shoots. Legal to own, legal to buy. Designed to look real at a glance, but impossible to pass as real currency under scrutiny. I clicked through photos, zooming in on details, tiny lettering along the edges, slightly different textures. Words like motion picture use only, printed so small you wouldn't notice unless you were looking for them. My hands trembled as I added 3 $20 bills to my cart. $60. That number felt symbolic somehow. When they arrived 4 days later in a plain envelope, I sat at my kitchen table, holding one next to a real 20. Side by side, they were almost identical. Enough to fool someone who wasn't paying attention. Enough to expose someone who was stealing without thinking. I stared at them for a long time. This wasn't about catching Jude for revenge. I kept telling myself that. This was about clarity, about truth, about protecting myself when no one else would. Still, a quiet voice in the back of my mind whispered that I was crossing a line. I ignored it. That Thursday, I texted Jude. I told him I was sorry for how things went in the car. I said I missed hanging out with him. I asked if he wanted to come over Saturday to try a new co-op game I'd downloaded. An hour later, he replied with one word. Sure. Saturday morning, I placed the 3 prop 20s and 1 real $5 bill into my wallet. I set it on the kitchen counter next to my keys, exactly where I usually left it. My hands felt cold. My stomach churned. When Jude arrived just after noon, he seemed normal. Too normal. We sat on the couch, controllers in hand, the game lighting up the room. Laughter. Trash talk. Small comments about school. After 40 minutes, I stood up. I'm going to grab drinks and chips from the basement, I said casually. I made sure he heard the door open. I made sure he heard the stairs creak. I stayed down there longer than necessary, 6, maybe 7 minutes, counting my breaths. When I came back up, Jude was still on the couch. Nothing looked different. We played for 2 more hours. I ordered pizza. We talked about track tryouts in the spring, about teachers he liked, about nothing that mattered and everything that hurt. I drove him home around 5. The moment his door closed behind him, I checked my wallet. One of the prop 20s was gone. I didn't feel victorious. I felt sick. I didn't call Sullivan. I didn't text Jude. I didn't tell anyone. I just waited. And when my phone rang 2 days later, I knew, before I even answered, that the proof I wanted had come with a cost I hadn't fully understood yet. My phone started ringing Monday morning while I was at my desk. Not a polite buzz, not a casual call. It was the kind of ring that feels aggressive, insistent, like the phone itself is angry at you. I glanced at the screen. Sullivan. My stomach dropped. I answered and immediately had to pull the phone away from my ear. What did you do? He shouted. What did you do to my son? I closed my eyes. He didn't pause long enough for me to respond. They arrested him, Sullivan yelled. They put him in handcuffs at the mall in front of everyone. My chest tightened so sharply it hurt. I asked him to slow down, to tell me what happened. Between breaths, between bursts of rage, he explained. Saturday night, after I dropped Jude off, he went to the mall with friends. He tried to buy a game. The cashier took the $20 bill and ran a counterfeit pen over it. The pen marked it as fake. The manager was called, then mall security, then the police. Because passing counterfeit currency, even unknowingly, is treated as a serious crime. He spent the night in a holding cell, Sullivan said, his voice cracking with fury. Charlotte is at the station right now. We had to call a lawyer. My hands were shaking. I waited until he stopped yelling. Then I asked one question. Where did Jude get the $20 bill? There was silence on the line. I asked again. Sullivan didn't answer. He hung up. I sat frozen at my desk, staring at my computer screen without seeing anything. Around me, coworkers typed and laughed and lived their normal Monday lives while my world collapsed inward. I kept picturing Jude, 17, skinny, scared, standing under fluorescent lights with strangers watching him like he was a criminal. And then another image followed it, unwanted but persistent. My wallet, the missing bill, the truth no one wanted to hear. That afternoon, I called a friend from college, Marcus, now a criminal defense attorney. I told him everything, from the missing cash to the prop money to the arrest. He was quiet for a long time after I finished. Legally, he said carefully, you're in a gray area. He explained that prop money itself wasn't illegal, but deliberately placing it in a situation where a minor could unknowingly commit a crime, that could be argued as entrapment, or at least reckless. You should talk to a lawyer, he said, immediately. That night I didn't sleep. I thought about Jude crying in my car, about Charlotte screaming at me, about Sullivan asking me to apologize. I also thought about all the times money had gone missing, about being called a liar, about being dismissed because it was easier than facing the truth. Tuesday evening, Sullivan called again. His voice was different, flat, defeated. He told me Jude had confessed, not just to stealing from me, but to stealing from them, too, for over a year, cash from a drawer in their kitchen. Money no one noticed disappearing because no one was looking. They searched Jude's room. They found nearly $300 hidden in a shoebox. Sullivan asked me if I planted the fake money. I said yes. He asked why. Because no one believed me, I said. He didn't respond. Charlotte called the next day. She said Jude stealing was wrong, but what I did was worse. She said I was cruel, that I should be ashamed, that I destroyed her son's life. I asked her one question. Are you ashamed that he stole from family for over a year? She hung up. That was the moment I realized this wasn't just about Jude anymore. This was about denial, about pride, about a family that would rather break apart than admit they were wrong. And the consequences, legal, emotional, irreversible, were only just beginning. The house felt unbearably quiet after that. Not the peaceful kind of silence I used to enjoy. No soft hum of appliances, no comforting stillness. This silence pressed in on me, heavy and judgmental, like the walls themselves were asking what kind of person I had become. I kept replaying the same images over and over. Jude in handcuffs, Jude sitting in a holding cell, Jude crying in my car, insisting I didn't trust him. I knew what he'd done. I knew the stealing wasn't a misunderstanding. The evidence was real. His confession was real. But knowing that didn't make the guilt disappear. At night, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, my chest tight, my thoughts spiraling. I wondered if there had been another way. If I should have locked my door, hidden my wallet, cut him off quietly, if pride had driven me more than self-protection. I hated that question most of all, because I couldn't fully deny it. 6 days after the arrest, I sat in a small law office across from a man named Robert, a family and juvenile law attorney I'd hired on Marcus's advice. He listened without interrupting, jotting notes on a yellow legal pad, his expression unreadable. When I finished, he leaned back and exhaled slowly. You did something incredibly stupid, he said bluntly. My throat tightened, but I didn't argue. He explained that while the prop money itself wasn't illegal, the intent behind using it could be questioned. A prosecutor might argue I knowingly created a situation where a minor could commit a crime. Even if that wasn't my goal, it wouldn't look good. Then he asked if I had proof Jude had stolen real money before. I showed him my bank statements, the consistent $40 withdrawals, the receipts, the mismatched totals. He nodded, but not confidently. That's circumstantial, he said. It shows money went missing. It doesn't prove who took it. Then he asked the question that made my stomach drop. Do you want to press charges against Jude for theft? I stared at his bookshelf, at the spines of thick legal volumes, and felt something inside me collapse. No, I said quietly. I don't want to destroy him. Robert nodded slowly. Then understand this. The criminal case isn't yours anymore. It belongs to the state. I left his office feeling smaller than I had in years. I wasn't sleeping. I wasn't eating properly. Every notification on my phone made my heart race. I kept expecting another call, from the police, from Charlotte, from someone telling me I'd crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. 3 weeks after the arrest, Sullivan called and asked if we could meet in person. We chose a diner on Route 9. I got there early and sat in a booth near the back, hands wrapped around a mug of coffee I wasn't drinking. When Sullivan walked in, he looked hollow, like the weight of the past weeks had physically reshaped him. He told me Jude's lawyer had managed to reduce the charge to a misdemeanor, a diversion program, community service, classes, probation. If Jude completed everything successfully, the charge would be sealed when he turned 18. Relief flickered through me, but it didn't last. Sullivan told me they'd found more in Jude's room. Not just cash. Expensive sneakers, a watch, an iPad. Things none of them remembered buying. Jude admitted he'd been shoplifting, using their credit cards online, having packages sent to friends' houses, selling items at school. I felt sick. This wasn't a single bad decision. This was a pattern. We sat in silence after that, coffee cooling between us, the diner buzzing around us, oblivious. Then Sullivan asked me if I planned to sue them. I said no. He nodded, like that answer was the last thing keeping him upright. Before he left, he said something that stayed with me long after the door closed behind him. I don't know how to feel about you anymore, he said. Part of me understands why you did what you did, and part of me can't forgive it. I drove home and sat in my car for nearly half an hour before going inside. For the first time since our parents died, I felt completely alone. Not misunderstood, not angry, just alone. And at the center of it all was a 17-year-old boy who had made terrible choices, and an adult woman who had made one choice she could never take back. This was the lowest point, the moment where there were no villains and no victories, only damage. The call came on a Thursday afternoon, just as I was packing up my desk. An unfamiliar number lit up my phone. Normally, I would have let it go to voicemail, but something told me not to. Hello? Hi, Emily. My name is Caroline. I'm a counselor at Jude's high school. Her voice was calm, professional, neutral in a way that immediately set her apart from everyone else who'd spoken to me about this so far. She explained that Sullivan and Charlotte had signed a release allowing her to contact me. She asked, gently, if I'd be willing to meet with her to talk about Jude. I said yes. The next afternoon, I sat in a small office with beige walls and a desk crowded with folders. Caroline didn't rush. She didn't accuse. She didn't soften the truth either. She told me Jude had been referred to her by his English teacher. He'd stopped participating in class, stopped speaking, stopped turning in work. He finally opened up, she said, and what he shared adds context. Not excuses, context. Then she asked a question that made my chest tighten. Did you know Jude has been bullied? I shook my head. No, I had no idea. Caroline nodded. It started last school year. Older students, at first verbal, then threats. She explained how it escalated, how they demanded money. $20, $30, every week. How they told him if he didn't pay, they'd beat him up after school. Jude didn't tell his parents. He was embarrassed. He was afraid. And, this part cut deeply, he didn't believe their parenting style would protect him. So he stole, first from a kitchen drawer, then from my wallet, then from stores, when cash wasn't enough. He was terrified, Caroline said, and the arrest made it worse. He's scared the bullies will use it against him. I sat there, hands clenched in my lap, tears burning behind my eyes. For the first time I saw the full picture. Not a thief, not a villain, but a frightened kid drowning in something he didn't know how to escape. Caroline told me the school was investigating. The students involved had been identified. Discipline was coming, slowly. Then she told me Jude wanted to write me a letter, not because anyone forced him to, because he wanted to. I left the school and sat in my car for a long time. This didn't erase what he'd done. It didn't erase what I'd done either. But it shifted something fundamental inside me. I wasn't the enemy. He wasn't either. We were both reacting to a situation that had been quietly rotting for far longer than anyone wanted to admit. That realization didn't bring peace, but it did bring clarity. And clarity changes how power works in a story. Jude's court date fell on a Wednesday morning. I wasn't required to be there. No subpoena, no obligation. But my lawyer, Robert, suggested I attend anyway. It shows good faith, he said, that you're not acting out of spite. So I went. I sat in the back of the courtroom, hands folded in my lap, my pulse loud in my ears. Sullivan and Charlotte sat in the front row behind Jude and his lawyer. Charlotte never turned around. Sullivan glanced back once, his eyes tired, then faced forward again. Jude looked smaller than I remembered. When his lawyer spoke, she laid out the diversion program, community service, financial responsibility classes, probation check-ins. The prosecutor didn't object. Then the bullying came up. Letters were submitted, statements from other students, context carefully framed, not as justification, but explanation. The judge asked Jude if he understood that being bullied didn't give him permission to steal. Yes, Your Honor, he said, voice barely above a whisper. She asked if he took responsibility for his actions. Yes. The diversion program was approved. If Jude completed everything successfully, the charge would be sealed when he turned 18. No criminal record. No permanent mark. Relief rippled through the room, but it was quiet, restrained. Afterward, Charlotte wrapped an arm around Jude and walked him out without looking at me. Sullivan followed. When he passed my row, he paused for half a second and nodded. It wasn't forgiveness, but it wasn't nothing. 2 weeks later, I received a letter. 3 handwritten pages on notebook paper. Jude apologized. Not quickly, not defensively, but thoughtfully. He explained the bullying from his perspective. The threats, the fear, the shame. He admitted lying to me in the car because he panicked. He wrote something I didn't expect. He said he understood why I used the fake money. Not that he liked it, not that it didn't hurt, but that he understood. He told me he'd gotten a part-time job at a grocery store. Thursday evenings, Saturday mornings. He promised to pay me back every dollar he stole, even if it took a year. He didn't ask for forgiveness. He said he hoped one day we might talk again. I folded the letter and put it in a drawer. A few days later, Sullivan came to my house without telling Charlotte. He looked broken. He told me things at home were bad. Charlotte was angry at everyone, at Jude, at him, at me. She barely spoke. Jude was isolated at school. The bullies were suspended, then returned. Rumors spread. Friends disappeared. Sullivan admitted something quietly, like a confession. It was easier to believe you were wrong, he said, than to admit our parenting wasn't working. That was the closest thing to accountability I'd heard. Weeks passed. Jude completed his community service. He paid me back in full. The diversion program closed his case. Legally, it was over. Emotionally, nothing was resolved. Charlotte still refused to speak to me. Sunday dinners were gone. My relationship with Sullivan became cautious, limited to small, neutral texts. The consequences landed where they belonged, but not cleanly, not evenly. Truth doesn't always restore what it breaks. Sometimes it just leaves the pieces where they fall. Jude turned 18 2 weeks after the diversion program officially ended. Legally, his record was sealed. On paper, the arrest never happened. No background checks, no disclosures on college applications, no permanent label attached to his name. Life, technically, moved on, but emotionally, nothing snapped back into place. Sullivan told me they had a small birthday dinner, just the 3 of them. No friends, no celebration posts, no laughter spilling out into the night. Jude seemed relieved, he said, but also quieter than before, more careful with his words, more withdrawn, like someone who learned too early that mistakes echo longer than apologies. I didn't send a card. I thought about it. I really did. I even stood in the greeting card aisle one evening after work, flipping through messages that felt either too cold or too forgiving. In the end, I walked out empty-handed. My house feels bigger now. Not physically, but emotionally. Too much space where routines used to live. The gaming PC Jude and I built together still sits in my living room. The tools in my garage are exactly where we left them. Sometimes I pause when I walk past them, my hand hovering, like muscle memory hasn't caught up to reality yet. Sullivan asked me recently if I thought we'd ever go back to normal. I told him the truth. I don't think our old normal exists anymore. He didn't argue. Charlotte still won't speak to me. The one time I ran into her at the grocery store, she looked at me like she wanted to say something, and then pushed her cart past me in silence. Later that night, Sullivan told me she cried, that she said she wanted to hate me but couldn't fully, and that made her angrier. I understand her more than she knows, because I live in that same contradiction. I know Jude stole from me. I know his parents called me a liar. I also know he was a scared kid being extorted by bullies who faced far fewer consequences than he did. I don't have a clean ending. No family meeting, no tearful reconciliation, no moral victory that wraps everything up neatly. What I have is clarity. I learned that love without boundaries isn't kindness, it's avoidance. That trust without accountability can quietly become permission. That telling the truth doesn't guarantee you'll be thanked for it. And I learned something about myself too. That even when you're right, the cost of proving it can be devastating. That protecting yourself doesn't always feel like strength. And that sometimes the most painful outcomes come from choices made when you feel trapped. Jude is starting his senior year. Sullivan is still trying to hold his marriage together. Charlotte is still angry. And I'm still living alone in the house I built for a life that looks different now. Maybe time will soften things, maybe it won't. But this is where we are. And the lesson I carry forward is this: truth matters, but so does how we respond when it's inconvenient. Ignoring problems doesn't keep families intact, it just delays the damage. Sometimes doing what feels necessary breaks more than it fixes. And sometimes that doesn't mean it was wrong, it just means it was real.